The meridian groaned like a wounded animal as it plowed through Visha-7's crimson atmosphere, its hull screaming against alien winds. Captain Sarah Torres fought the dying controls, her knuckles white as she wrestled with the ship's final descent. The cargo vessel had been her home for 3 years, hauling supplies between the outer colonies, but now it was becoming her potential tomb. Metal shrieked against stone as the ship carved a brutal furrow across the planet's surface, finally coming to rest in a valley dotted with strange crystalline formations. Sarah's head throbbed as she pulled herself from the pilot's chair, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows across the buckled bulkheads. The life support systems wheezed, but held she had maybe 48 hours of breathable air, assuming. The hull hadn't been completely compromised. Outside, Visha-7 stretched before her like an alien painting. Twin moons hung in a lavender sky, casting silver light across landscapes that seemed to shimmer with their own inner radiance. The crystalline structures she'd seen from above were actually buildings or had been. Now they lay in ruins, their translucent walls shattered like broken dreams across the valley floor. Sarah activated her portable scanner, searching for signs of life or salvageable technology. The readings were confusing massive energy signatures from the destroyed settlement, but they were old, maybe days or weeks past. Whatever had happened here, she'd missed it. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of wind through the crystal ruins and the distant hum of her ship's failing systems. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement among the debris. At first, she thought it was just reflected light, playing tricks on her oxygen-starved mind. But there it was again, a brief flash of blue-green luminescence darting between the fallen structures. Sarah approached slowly, her boots crunching on crystal fragments, each step echoing in the empty valley. The glow came from what looked like a child, no bigger than a house cat, with delicate features that seemed carved from starlight itself. Translucent skin pulsed with waves of color blues and greens, and purples that shifted like aurora across her tiny form. Large, dark eyes dominated a face that might have been beautiful if not for the terror etched across it. When the child saw Sarah, her luminescence flared brilliant white a strobe of pure panic that hurt to look at directly. She darted away with impossible speed, disappearing into the ruins with a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. Sarah stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. In 30 years of space travel, she'd never encountered anything like this. The child had looked at her with such fear, such desperate terror, that Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Whatever had destroyed this place, whoever had done this to these people, the child clearly believed Sarah was part of it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She was the monster in this story, the giant bipedal creature that had come to finish what others had started. But Sarah Torres hadn't survived 3 decades in the black by giving up when things got difficult. She looked at the spot where the child had disappeared, noting the faint trail of luminescent particles that marked her passage. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered to the empty air, knowing the words meant nothing to alien ears. But maybe, just maybe, her tone might carry something universal. The valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting. 3 days had passed since Sarah's first encounter with the luminescent child, and the engineer had learned to move through the crystal ruins like she was walking through a library quietly, respectfully, aware that she was surrounded by something precious that had been broken. Her ship's emergency rations were holding out, and she'd managed to patch the life support systems enough to buy herself another week, maybe 2 if she was careful. The child, she'd started thinking of the alien as she, based on the delicate bone structure and graceful movements, was always there, just at the edge of perception. Sarah would catch glimpses of blue-green light behind fallen walls, or find tiny footprints in the crystalline dust that sparkled like glitter. Sometimes she would hear what sounded like music, high and ethereal, floating through the ruins like a ghost of happier times. Sarah had started talking to the silence, narrating her actions as she worked to repair her ship and explore the destroyed settlement. "I'm just checking this power coupling," she would say aloud, her voice carrying across the valley. "My ship's reactor is running at about 60% efficiency. Nothing dangerous, just lonely." She felt foolish at first, but something about the broken beauty of this place made her want to fill it with words, with the sound of a living voice. On the fourth day, she found the first gift. It was waiting beside her ship when she emerged from the engine compartment, covered in coolant fluid and cursing at a particularly stubborn plasma injector. A small crystal, no bigger than her thumb, pulsed with gentle blue light. It was warm to the touch and seemed to thrum with energy, like a captured heartbeat. Sarah held it up to the light, watching patterns dance within its depths. "Thank you," she said to the air, and somewhere in the ruins she thought she heard a sound like silver bells. The gifts continued, always small, always beautiful, always left when she wasn't looking. A flower made of living light that bloomed in her palm. A stone that sang when the wind touched it. A tiny sculpture that looked like a dancer frozen mid-leap, her arms raised toward stars. Sarah couldn't see. With each gift, Sarah began to understand more about the child's bioluminescent communication. The blue-green glow she'd first seen was fear, but there were other colors too. Soft purple meant curiosity. Golden yellow was what Sarah had started thinking of as contentment. And sometimes, just sometimes, she would catch a flicker of pale pink that made her heart ache with its resemblance to hope. Sarah began leaving gifts of her own. A small piece of polished metal that caught the light, a flower she'd picked from the hardier vegetation near her ship, a small tool from her kit that made musical notes when tapped. She would place them at the edge of the ruins and retreat, watching from a distance as the child approached with movements like liquid starlight. The child's body language was becoming familiar. The way she tilted her head when she was curious, the rapid flutter of her luminescent patterns when she was nervous, the way she would pause and look towards Sarah's hiding spot as if she could sense her presence. Sarah found herself learning to read the alien's emotions in the play of light across her translucent skin. One evening, as Desha7's twin moons rose over the valley, Sarah sat by her ship and began to hum. It was an old song, something her grandmother had sung to her during the long nights of her childhood on Mars Station. The melody was simple, repetitive, designed to soothe rather than entertain. Her voice carried across the crystal ruins, mixing with the whisper of wind and the distant chiming of broken structures. The child appeared at the edge of the ruins, her form glowing soft gold in the moonlight. She stood perfectly still, her large eyes fixed on Sarah, her luminescence pulsing in rhythm with the melody. For the first time, she didn't flee. She just listened, her colors shifting from gold to pale pink to something Sarah had never seen before, a warm sunrise orange that seemed to speak of wonder. When Sarah finished the song, the child remained for a long moment, her colors rippling like water. Then she raised her tiny hand and touched it to her chest, over what Sarah assumed was her heart. The gesture was so universal, so achingly human, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "I see you," Sarah whispered, and the child's glow brightened. For just a moment before she melted back into the ruins, leaving only the faintest trace of luminescent particles in the air. Progress. Asterisk. The breakthrough came on the 7th day. When Sarah discovered the child's name, she had been working on the ship's communications array, trying to boost the signal strength enough to reach the nearest colony, when she heard it a sound like crystal wind chimes mixed with the whisper of solar wind. The child was singing, her voice carrying across the valley in a melody that seemed to make the very air shimmer. Sarah put down her tools and listened, her heart breaking at the beauty and sadness woven into every note. The song told a story, Even without words, Sarah could understand. It spoke of light and laughter, of a community that had danced among me. Crystal spires. It sang of darkness coming, of terror and loss, and the silence that followed. And woven throughout, like a thread of silver through black cloth, was a single word that repeated over and over. Zephyr. Sarah waited until the song ended, then spoke into the crystal clear air. Zephyr, she said, her voice gentle. Is that your name? The response was immediate, a flare of golden light from the ruins, followed by the child's appearance at the edge of the settlement. She stood perfectly still, her luminescence cycling through rapid patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as complex emotions. Surprise, wonder, something that might have been joy, and underneath it all, a deep current of grief. Zephyr, Sarah repeated, and the child's glow brightened. She touched her chest again, the same gesture she'd made after the lullaby, and Sarah realized it meant me or I in the child's culture. I'm Sarah, she said, copying the gesture. Sarah. The child Zephyr tilted her head, and her luminescence shifted to pale purple. Curiosity. She took a step closer, then another, her movements fluid and graceful, despite her obvious caution. Sarah remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Zephyr's voice was like music when she spoke, a series of tones and harmonies that Sarah's translator couldn't parse. But underneath the alien syllables, she caught something that might have been Sarah, filtered through vocal cords, designed for an entirely different kind of communication. Yes, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. I'm Sarah, and you're Zephyr. The child's glow shifted to that warm sunrise orange wonder Sarah had decided to call it. She came closer, close enough that Sarah could see the intricate patterns that flowed beneath her translucent skin, like living circuitry made of light. Her face was delicate, almost ethereal, with large dark eyes that held depths Sarah couldn't fathom. Over the following days, their communication evolved rapidly. Zephyr began to understand some of Sarah's words, especially her name and simple concepts like food and water. In return, Sarah learned to read the nuances of Zephyr's bioluminescent language. Rapid pulses of red meant danger. Slow, steady. Blue was sadness. The golden glow she'd first seen was contentment, but mixed with purple, it meant curiosity about something pleasant. Sarah learned that Zephyr's people, the Lumina, had been refugees themselves, fleeing some greater catastrophe to find peace in this valley. They had lived here for generations, building their crystal city and raising their children in harmony with the planet's natural energies. They were artists and musicians, philosophers and gardeners, a people who had chosen beauty over conquest, growth over expansion. Then the raiders had come. Zephyr's colors went dark when she tried to explain, her luminescence flickering like a dying star. She had been in the outer gardens when the ships appeared, black shapes against the lavender sky. She had watched from hiding as the raiders, bipedal beings in dark armor, had systematically destroyed everything the Lumina had built. They had taken prisoners, including Zephyr's family, and left the rest of the settlement in ruins. Where did they take them? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure Zephyr would understand the question. But the child's response was clear enough. She pointed toward the mountains that rose beyond the valley, her luminescence pulsing urgent yellow. Somewhere out there, other Lumina might still be alive. Somewhere beyond the crystal ruins, Zephyr's people were waiting. Sarah looked at her ship, at the communications array that still refused to function properly, at the supplies that would last maybe another week. She thought about the safe thing to do, the sensible thing: wait for rescue, conserve resources, survive until help arrived. Then she looked at Zephyr, at the hope that was slowly returning to her luminescent patterns, and made a different choice. We're going to find them, she said, not caring whether Zephyr understood the words. The child's glow shifted to that pale pink of hope, and Sarah knew she'd made the right decision. Some bonds transcend species, transcend language, transcend everything, except the simple recognition of one soul reaching out to another. Sarah had found something in this broken valley that she hadn't even known she was looking for, a purpose that went beyond survival, beyond duty, beyond the careful boundaries she'd built around her heart. She was going to help Zephyr find her. People, no matter what it took. The mountains of Vesha 7 rose like jagged teeth against the alien sky, their peaks shrouded in perpetual mist that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Sarah had spent 3 days preparing for the journey, converting her ship's emergency supplies into a portable kit, while Zephyr watched with growing excitement. Her luminescence cycling through patterns that Sarah had learned meant anticipation, mixed with anxiety. The child had grown bolder in the past week, venturing closer to Sarah's ship, and even accepting food from her hands, though the lumina seemed to subsist primarily on some kind of energy they absorbed from the crystal formations. Sarah had watched in fascination as Zephyr would place her, tiny palms against the glowing crystals, her skin brightening as she fed on whatever power source they contained. "They're like living batteries," Sarah had muttered to herself, making notes in her journal. Or maybe living solar collectors. The crystals store energy from the planet's core, and the lumina can tap into it directly. It was remarkable biotechnology, evolved rather than invented, a perfect symbiosis between a species and their environment. Now, as they prepared to leave the valley, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what they would find in the mountains. Zephyr had tried to explain through her light language and gestures, showing Sarah crude drawings in the crystal dust. Raiders with ships, caves in the mountains, lines that might have been bars or cages. The story was fragmentary, filtered through trauma and translated across species barriers. But the basic message was clear. The Lumina prisoners were being held somewhere in the mountain range, and Zephyr believed they were still alive. Sarah had managed to get her ship's sensors working well enough to do a preliminary scan of the mountain region. The readings were confusing massive energy signatures that seemed to move and shift, metal structures that appeared and disappeared from the scans, and something else, something that made her instruments fluctuate wildly whenever she tried to focus on it. "There's definitely something up there," she told Zephyr, who was perched on the edge of the ship's ramp, her legs dangling like a child's. Something big and artificial and trying very hard not to be detected. Zephyr's response was a rapid flicker of yellow and red excitement tinged with fear. She pointed toward the mountains again, then to herself, and made a gesture that Sarah had learned meant family, or people like me. Her luminescence pulsed with desperate hope. They set out. At dawn, Sarah carrying a pack loaded with supplies and survival gear, Zephyr riding on her shoulder like a luminous fairy. The child weighed almost nothing, her bones apparently hollow or filled with some lighter material, and she had a way of adjusting her grip that never felt uncomfortable. Her presence was oddly comforting, like having a living nightlight that whispered encouragement in musical tones. The terrain beyond the valley was harsher than Sarah had expected. The ground was covered in a crystalline sand that shifted and sparkled with each step, and the air grew thinner as they climbed. Strange plants dotted the landscape, things that looked like flowers, but chimed like bells when the wind touched them. Trees with silver bark that reflected their movement like funhouse mirrors. Zephyr proved to be an excellent guide. Her luminescence, changing to alert Sarah to dangers she couldn't see. Purple meant safe passage. Orange indicated unstable ground. Red was immediate danger, like the moment when Zephyr's entire body flared crimson, just before a section of crystal-crusted rock gave way beneath Sarah's feet. "Thanks, little one," Sarah gasped, pulling herself back from the edge of what turned out to be a deep crevasse. Zephyr's glow shifted to worried yellow, and she pressed her tiny hand against Sarah's cheek in a gesture that needed no translation. They made camp that night in a cave that hummed with gentle energy, its walls lined with the same crystals that had powered the Lumina settlement. Zephyr immediately went to the crystal formations, pressing her palms against them and brightening visibly as she fed. Sarah watched, fascinated, as the child's luminescence grew stronger and more stable. "It's like you're plugging into a universal power source," Sarah observed, settling down beside her small companion. "Your whole species evolved to live in harmony with this planet's energy systems." Zephyr responded with a complex pattern of lights that Sarah was beginning to recognize as storytelling. The child's luminescence painted pictures in the air scenes of Lumina history, of their migration to this world, of their gradual integration with the planet's natural systems. She showed Sarah how her people had learned to shape the crystals, to grow them into the forms they needed, to create art that was both beautiful and functional. Then the story turned dark, and Zephyr's colors shifted to deep blues and purples. She showed Sarah the coming of the raiders, the destruction of the settlement, the capture of her people. But there was something else, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. The raiders weren't just taking prisoners. They were studying the Lumina, learning from them, trying to understand the secret of their energy manipulation. "They're not just slavers," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. "They're strip mining your people's knowledge. They want to know how you interface with the crystals." Zephyr's response was a flash of silver affirmation mixed with fear. She pointed toward the mountains, her luminescence pulsing with urgent patterns. Time was running out. Whatever the raiders were doing to the captured Lumina, they were doing it quickly. Sarah looked at her small companion, at the hope and determination that blazed in her alien features, and felt something harden in her chest. She'd spent most of her life as a drifter, a cargo hauler with no permanent connections, no causes worth fighting for. But this tiny being had changed something fundamental in her worldview. This was about more than rescue. It was about protecting something precious from those who would destroy it for profit. "We'll find them," Sarah promised, and Zephyr's glow shifted to that warm sunrise orange that meant wonder and gratitude. "We'll find them, and we'll bring them home." The mountains loomed above them, dark and forbidding, but Sarah felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from her life for years. She had found her cause, her mission, her family, even if that family was an alien child no bigger than a house cat who spoke in light and music. Tomorrow, they would face whatever waited in the peaks. Tonight, they would rest and prepare. Two unlikely companions bound together by hope and determination, and the simple recognition that some things are worth fighting for, regardless of the odds. Zephyr curled up against Sarah's side, her luminescence dimming to a soft golden glow that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. Sarah watched over her, one hand resting protectively on the child's tiny form, and for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Part 5. The language of kindness. The raider facility was a scar of black metal and harsh angles carved into the living rock of the mountain, its edges softened by mist that swirled around the peaks like ghostly fingers. Sarah crouched behind a crystal outcropping, watching the patrol patterns through her binoculars, while Zephyr pressed herself against the rocks. Her luminescence dimmed to barely perceptible levels. They had been observing the facility for 2 days, learning its rhythms and routines. The raiders were humanoid, but clearly not human taller, with elongated limbs and faces hidden behind environmental masks. They moved with military precision, their dark armor absorbing light rather than reflecting it, making them difficult to track in the mountain's perpetual twilight. But Sarah had spotted the weaknesses in their security. The facility was powered by a massive crystal formation at its heart, one that the raiders had clearly harvested from the planet's natural systems. The same crystals that fed the Lumina were now being used to power their captor's technology. Bitter irony that made Sarah's jaw clench with anger. "There," Zephyr whispered, her voice like wind through silver chimes. She pointed toward a section of the facility where the metal walls were punctuated by transparent panels. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see movement inside flickers of bioluminescent light that pulsed in patterns of distress and despair. The captured lumina were being held in some kind of research facility, their natural abilities studied, and catalogued by beings who saw them as resources rather than people. Sarah watched as one of the raiders approached a containment unit, instruments in hand, and saw the panicked flare of light from within. Her companion was trembling beside her, her own luminescence flickering with sympathetic distress. "We're going to get them out," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at her insides. "All of them." The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Sarah would create a distraction by overloading the facility's power crystal, causing a cascading failure that would disable their security systems. In the chaos that followed, she and Zephyr would infiltrate the research section and free the prisoners. It was desperate, probably suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. Sarah had spent the morning preparing, using her engineering knowledge to construct a device that would destabilize the crystal matrix. It was crude work, built from salvaged components and held together with determination, but it should be enough to cause the kind of feedback loop that would bring down the facility's power grid. "When the lights go out," she told Zephyr, "you lead your people to the crystal caves we passed yesterday. They'll be safe there until we can figure out how to get everyone off planet." Zephyr's response was a rapid cycling of colors that Sarah had learned meant argument. The child was insisting on staying with her, on sharing whatever dangers lay ahead. Sarah felt her heart break a little at the courage blazing in that tiny form. "I know you want to help," Sarah said gently, "but your people are going to be scared and confused. They need someone they trust to guide them to safety. They need you." The logic was sound, but Sarah could see the conflict in Zephyr's luminescent patterns. The child had formed a bond with the strange bipedal being who had shown her kindness, who had learned her language, and promised to help find her family. The idea of separation, even temporary, was clearly painful. Sarah knelt down and extended her hand, palm up. Zephyr approached cautiously, then placed her tiny hand in Sarah's much larger one. The contact was electric literally, as Sarah felt a gentle tingling that seemed to resonate in her bones. The child's bioluminescence flowed across their joined hands, and for a moment, Sarah could swear she felt what Zephyr felt: hope and fear and gratitude and love, all mixed together in a cocktail of pure emotion. "I'll find you," Sarah promised. "When this is over, I'll find you and we'll figure out what comes next. Together." Zephyr's glow shifted to that warm sunrise orange, and she pressed her forehead against Sarah's hand in a gesture that transcended species, trust, faith, the belief that kindness once given creates bonds that can't be broken by distance or danger. The assault began at dusk, when the facility's external lighting made it easiest to move unseen. Sarah's device worked better than she'd hoped. The crystal matrix didn't just overload, it exploded, sending cascading failures through every system in the facility. Emergency lights flickered and died, security barriers powered down, and the harsh electric hum of alien technology fell silent in the chaos that followed. Sarah and Zephyr moved through the facility like ghosts, following the pulse of bioluminescent light that led them deeper into the research section. The captive lumina were kept in individual cells, their natural glow dimmed by whatever technology the raiders had used to suppress their abilities. There were dozens of them, adults and children, all showing signs of the trauma they'd endured. Zephyr's reunion with her people was a symphony of light and sound that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The child's luminescence blazed like a star as she was surrounded by her family, her patterns cycling through every color. Sarah had learned to recognize joy, relief, love, and underneath it all, the deep gratitude of a people who had thought they were lost forever. But there wasn't time for extended celebrations. The raiders would regroup soon, and the facility's backup systems were already beginning to come online. Sarah led the group through the facility's corridors, following the route she'd memorized during their reconnaissance. The lumina moved like liquid light, their bioluminescence providing the only illumination in the darkened complex. They almost made it. The Raider Patrol found them at the facility's main entrance, weapons raised and voices harsh with commands in an alien language. Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between the raiders and the Lumina, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Behind her, she could hear Zephyr's luminescence flaring with distress. The lead raider approached, his weapon trained on Sarah's chest. Through his environmental mask, she could see eyes that held no warmth, no compassion, only the cold calculation of a being who saw other species as resources to be exploited. Then Zephyr stepped forward. The child's luminescence blazed with patterns Sarah had never seen before, complex, beautiful, and utterly alien. The light seemed to reach into the raider's mind, bypassing his technology and speaking directly to whatever consciousness lay beneath his armor. Other lumina joined her, their combined bioluminescence creating a display that was part communication, part art, part something that transcended both. The raiders stood frozen, their weapons lowering as they stared at the light show. Sarah watched in amazement as the luminous patterns shifted and flowed, telling the story of their people, their history, their love for this world and for each other. It was a language that required no translation, a communication that spoke to the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. When the display ended, the raiders stood in silence for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, the lead raider removed his weapon's power cell and let it fall to the ground. His companions followed suit, their hostility replaced by something that might have been shame. They walked away without a word, leaving the Lumina free to return to their world. Later, as Sarah sat by the crystal caves watching the survivors rebuild their community, Zephyr curled up beside her and began to glow with that warm sunrise orange that meant wonder and gratitude. The child's luminescence painted patterns in the air, not words, but something deeper. A promise that kindness, once given, creates ripples that extend far beyond the original act. Sarah understood now why the raiders had let them go. They had seen something in the luminous light that reminded them of their own capacity for compassion, their own ability to choose mercy over cruelty. The language of kindness, it turned out, was universal. It just required the right translator. As the twin moons rose over Desha 7, casting silver light across the valley, Sarah began to hum the lullaby her grandmother had taught her. Zephyrs. Luminescence pulsed in rhythm with the melody, and gradually, other lumina joined in, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to make the very air shimmer with beauty. The song they created together was new, born from the meeting of two species who had learned to see past their differences to the common ground of compassion that connected all living things. It was a song of hope and healing, of trauma overcome, and trust restored, of the simple recognition that kindness is indeed a language that transcends all barriers. In the end, Sarah never did get her ship repaired. She found something better, a home, a family, a purpose that went beyond mere survival. And in the crystal caves of Desha 7, surrounded by beings who spoke in light and music, she discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand plans or heroic intentions, but with the simple decision to reach out to another soul in need. The language of kindness, she learned, was the only one that truly mattered. End of story.